Good evening. Right now, Metro Police are desperately searching for the person or people responsible for killing a man and a woman.
And I got a male down in the middle of the street.
Breaking news now, a triple shooting leaves 2 dead.
Never expect for somebody to tell you your loved one was murdered.
This Labor Day will mark 42 years that have haunted the St. Cloud family.
30 years. 30 years this family has waited for answers.
A couple months go by, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you really start to struggle with the idea that the case might not get solved and that somebody might get away with murder.
It's very unfortunate that we have any cold cases at all, and certainly unfortunate that we have as many as we do. And that's why Ryan's work and the work of Project Cold Case is so important.
All right. Hello. Thanks for joining us here at Project Cold Case. I'm the founder and executive director of Project Cold Case, Ryan Backmann. I have a very special guest today, victims' rights attorney and friend, Jay Howell. Jay, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Are you?
I am. I am glad to be here, and our community here in Jacksonville is real proud of the good work that you've done with Project Cold Case.
Well, thank you.
You've gotten really good traction, and you've gotten real good standing for this issue now here in Florida, and your efforts are resonating in different places around the country. So this has been a real success story, and we're proud that you're doing this out of our hometown in Jacksonville.
Well, thanks, Jay. That means a lot. One, because I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, and so will a lot of people when we get through a little bit of your history here in a few minutes. But also because you were one of the first people I met transitioning into this victim-serving world, and so you saw me as just a survivor, as a guy that had lost my dad and was looking for answers and had lots and lots of questions. And
you did have a lot of questions.
I still call you regularly with those questions, and you've always been very supportive and helpful and given me answers. I think that has helped me tremendously because, as you know, getting into this world, it's a different world. Victim serving, the political aspects, dealing with politicians, dealing with law enforcement, dealing with families. We got a lot of personalities from a lot of different angles.
And you're dealing in a cauldron. That is, you've had a life-ending event often, or a life-changing event at the heart of it, and that makes it really rough on the people whose lives have been most dramatically affected, the victims.
And they typically have what sometimes we may view as simple questions or questions that we take for granted because we've dealt with them for years and years and years. But when you're thrust into this as a victim or survivor, you really don't know any of these questions. It's a foreign land.
You're wounded, and you're injured, and you're in a foreign land, often at the mercy of whoever is the last person that you talk to, and a lot of times the advice is bad. The rights of victims and the role of the victim in the process has never been completely understood by the criminal justice system.
We're still learning as we go. We're still kind of making headways, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But to give people an idea, your background, you are an attorney. You graduated from the University of Florida.
Undergraduate, I did. I am a Gator.
You're a Gator. Then you went on. Where'd you get your law degree?
SMU in Dallas. Practiced for a year in Dallas, Texas.
Came on back to the great state of Florida.
Back.
And is that you went to work as a assistant state attorney?
I did here in Jacksonville. Did that for 4 years under Ed Austin.
And you prosecuted mostly child abuse cases?
I did.
Or made your way up to child abuse?
I did focus on child abuse and child sexual assault and rape, although I tried the normal gamut from homicides to DUIs.
Do you have any idea how many cases you actually took to trial while you were?
I tried 50 cases in front of juries during the 4 years I was there.
Wow, that was a pretty busy time even.
Well, there were two other guys that were with me then who also did that, but we had the most trials at that time in that office.
That kind of gets you started on the road to victims' rights and to assisting victims. I mean, were you involved in any of that in college, right out of school?
No, I started out in the child abuse. I ended up, the first felony case I tried, just gotten up from county court, DUIs, misdemeanors of different kinds. And the first case on my desk for a trial was a physical child abuse case. And that got me involved in working on child abuse, abused kids, and that steered me into the rights of the victim. And of course I tried a lot of sexual battery cases, a lot of rape cases, and that also immersed me in the issues. I mean, back in those days, the victims were treated like evidence or fingerprints or something.
Yeah.
They were the person whose life had been most dramatically affected by the crime was on the outside of the system looking in. The system didn't tolerate interference from victims so much, and those were the early days, because in the late 70s, the victims movement in America started by sexual assault victims.
Yeah.
Raising their hand and saying the way we're being treated is bad. And that was the genesis of what became a national victims' rights movement.
And it truly was. They were being treated bad. I mean, rape victims historically kind of get treated poorly. Even to this day, we see that happen occasionally, not necessarily by the courts, but the court of public opinion. The fear of retribution, the shame that goes along with it. Back then, though, that was just the norm.
We don't think about this because we're living in this time, but the truth is we've made more progress in how we treat sexual crime victims and all crime victims, more progress in the last 50 years than we made in the previous 5,000 years on this planet. I mean, we are improving, but we tend not to see it because we're living in that time of improvement. But you can go back in history, the women and children were regarded as property, and victims were not given a primary role in the criminal cases, and that, of course, is dramatically changing.
It is. And a lot of that thanks to some of your hard work back then, too. After you left, how did you come to leave the state attorney's office? Did that transition you to D.C.?
I left. Paula Hawkins was a newly elected U.S. Senator from Florida, and she got an investigations subcommittee. So I went to Washington. She needed somebody to run that subcommittee and do investigations and conduct hearings for her. And she was looking for somebody that had some experience, not Washington experience. She was looking
right.
for a real world experience. And so I went up there as chief counsel of the Investigations and Oversight Subcommittee in the U.S. Senate.
Tell us a little bit about that. I'll get more specific. What is it like going from being a prosecutor that's trying to make the world a better place, putting bad people away for doing bad things, trying to help victims, and then you walk into D.C. in, what is this, the early 80s?
Mm-hmm.
You walk
81.
Walk into Washington, D.C. in 1981. I mean, you had to be like, this is going to be a great gig for me. I'm going to go and really make a difference.
Well, it's a different arena.
Yeah.
The first thing I learned is because you can try a case skillfully in a courtroom does not mean you can conduct a successful United States Senate hearing, does not mean that you can negotiate the waters of all the different things that come to play in that arena. But it was fascinating to learn it. And we did a whole lot of work on issues pertaining to children, issues pertaining to serial murderers. Mm-hmm. We did child pornography. We did different kinds of Senate hearings and sponsored legislation into the issues that pertain to the rights of children, because the full committee that we were attached to had jurisdiction over children. We also did some things at that time. The Behavioral Sciences Unit of the FBI, the Silence of the Lambs Unit, if you will, was a pilot project. So I went down there and went through that with the investigators who were running it at the time. And I worked with Pierce Brooks, who actually started the concept of comparing data and information on murders state to state.
Yeah.
LAPD, great guy. And we did a Senate hearing on the investigation and apprehension of serial murderers. And we got a dozen, 10 senators from both sides of the aisle to write a letter to the Attorney General asking that be made a permanent part of their budget rather than a pilot project.
Right.
We also asked them to establish, in 1983, they did the first unidentified dead file, so that you could actually compare data from the deceased unknown individuals, or about 4,000, 5,000 in the country. We surveyed medical examiners around the country. And in 83 then, they did establish that first data interaction. And I remember when the first case hit, it was a young man who had jumped from a tall building in Vegas.
Yeah.
And the Vegas authorities didn't have any ID on him and didn't know who he was. And of course, that's a major tourist destination.
Sure, could have been anybody from anywhere.
Could have been anybody. It turned out to be a young man who had left voluntarily from Massachusetts or Connecticut a couple years before. And when the information linked up and the investigators went to his parents and told them, here's what's happened, and we now have a data system that processes the information about him with a missing person report that was up here, the family said, wow, that's good, and we appreciate you telling us. I can't believe that technology just started.
Right.
Because it seems like a natural, doesn't it, to compare
sure.
that and to link those things up.
And that battle's still going on. NamUs is
NamUs is
and they are the missing person unidentified.
And we still have problems
clearinghouse.
with it.
And we still have huge problems with it. We dealt with it last week while I was down in Sanford with Sheriff Sadie Darnell. She's always pushing that unidentified and talking. We've had events here locally every year. John Rowan's parents do Missing Adult Day in City Hall, and a representative from NamUs showed up last year. And they have DNA kits that families of missing can literally submit their DNA, right then, sent to University of North Texas, which has a huge anthropology and unidentified project, and they'll run the DNA and they'll upload it to check against all these unidentified remains in NamUs. And that's technology, back then probably, or surely wasn't even thought of, in 83.
Right. We didn't have DNA.
Yeah, that wasn't a thing. But that's where we're coming, and more of those cases are, those victims are being identified. Some of them, a lot of them homicide victims. Some of them suicides that, go off into somewhere and commit suicide and are not found for a significant amount of time, and IDing them can be difficult.
Well, we had one tragic example right here in Northeast Florida of that system not being used properly.
Yeah.
When Fred Luster
disappeared.
Yeah. Teenager.
Yep.
Minor. Fred disappeared 23 years. He disappears. His partial remains are discovered down the road, 75 miles.
Yeah.
And yet, the missing data about him and the discovery right in the same time frame, within a week of his disappearance, were never properly linked up for 23 years. You know what finally resolved that?
I do, but you told me. But
well, what happened was some of the Lake City investigators attended a training from my old outfit, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And they learned that there was all kinds of resources out here.
Social media being one of them.
So they invited the center down. They brought a team, took some of that information kit stuff you're talking about, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has a site called Help ID Me on Facebook.
Right.
They posted his shirt, timing, when the body was discovered, where, clothing. And of course, you knew who was looking on that site all the time, the family of Fred.
Exactly.
And they saw that and said, They recognized that shirt, the timing is the same of when the body was found, and that resolved the case. Now, it shouldn't have taken that extraordinary circumstance to do that.
Sure.
It should have, the appropriate data should have been entered and put in, and all these resources taken advantage of, and poor Fred would have been identified
And
much sooner.
That case led to an arrest too.
Yeah, and there's a ongoing criminal homicide charge
Right.
in that case. So, but back in the early days, these were new things.
Right. Well, and we do see the benefits of technology. We use them here at Project Cold Case all the time. That's why we're constantly sharing cases on social media, because you just never know when the right person is going to see it and be able to resolve a case. So when you're up there in D.C. as a Senate investigator, missing children becomes a hot topic.
It did. In the spring of '81, we started to look at it. We started to look at it because Congressman Paul Simon, who then became a senator and ran for president at one time, great guy, he was in the House, and he had introduced a bill that would assist in the tracking of missing kids. Congressman Simon then would say, if we can track a car, a boat, a firearm, all these things, why can't we do a better job of tracking kids? So we took a look at it and decided that it was an idea that needed work, so we started to work on it. I contacted the mothers of missing children in Atlanta, because Atlanta had like 23 disappearances and homicides of young people, kids and young people, over the previous 2 years. I contacted Julie and Stan Pates, whose son Eitan Pates was Eitan Pates was a well-known missing kid from New York City.
Right. He was the milk carton?
Well, we did, people have asked me that, but he probably was one of the first that went on milk cartons, simply because we had these pictures and the private sector was asking for them, and so we provided. So he might have been one of the first, but we introduced a bill in the Senate. Senator Hawkins introduced a bill that spring, similar to the House version, to increase the capability of looking for missing kids. We then started to work on it, reaching out to police and nonprofit agencies, because that's about all that was working on it around the country then, and Child Find in New York. There were a lot of good nonprofits, but we ended up sponsoring that legislation, and then, of course, that summer, Adam Walsh was kidnapped.
Yeah.
And so I contacted John, his father, just a couple of weeks, 3 weeks maybe, after Adam's body was recovered, and I told him what we were doing and asked him if he wanted to get involved, and he certainly did.
Yeah, he had a lot to say.
He had a lot to say, and he said it very well. He was a unique individual because he was very charismatic and very articulate and very smart.
Yeah.
And that power, combined with his personal
story
tragedy of his child, made him a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and you guys kind of did a lot of things together for the next few years.
We did spend a lot of time together, did a lot of work together, and the subcommittee that we had became kind of a center in itself. Parents, law enforcement, different people all over the country were contacting us about the different aspects.
They figured out somebody cared, and they were all trying to get their.
So we got the calls.
Yeah,
and we were working on cases of serial murderers. We did some other things, like we busted a child pornographer who was running a child porno thing out of a Florida prison. We did other things, but a lot of it had to do with the same issues of crimes against kids. So then that fall, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention contacted me and said, you seem to be the center of this storm that's going on. What do you think needs to be done? So I sat down and wrote, I think, 8 items on a letter. An 800 number to look for kids.
Yeah.
Training for law enforcement. State legislation to improve the laws protecting children. A resource center that put out information for searching parents so that they'd have it. And the center has who knows how many publications now.
Sure.
Child safety directed, what you should talk to your child about personal safety, what to do if your child is a victim of different crimes. So I put 8 items, and to my shock, they called me a week later and said, we're going to do the first 6 items on your list.
Wow, that's amazing, because that had to be
It was a lot of money.
Yeah, that had to be at a lot of expense. And I remember reading something, doing some research. You were talking about in the article, and I realized this was a number of years ago, but kind of that we were telling kids the wrong ways to be, how to deal with strangers, how to handle this stuff. And there was one thing I read, and it was so simple. Adults don't go to children for help. You know, like, if you can teach your kids anything, it's that an adult should not be coming to you and asking you to help find their dog, you know.
Exactly. Some of it was really simple, some of it was common sense. The problem was a lot of people were writing this stuff who didn't know anything about crimes against children.
Yeah.
And never worked. Well, they were nice people and well-intentioned.
That
They
well-intentioned
weren't trying to
thing.
hurt anybody. But the stranger concept is inaccurate in terms of the real perpetrators of child abuse are often known to the child.
Related.
Number 2, it gives the child a classification category that they have to use to evaluate you.
Right.
Don't go anywhere with strangers. So the kid runs into somebody, or somebody does ask for instructions, or has a dog they're looking for, or whatever. The kid says, is this a stranger? Well, I don't know. If you actually interview children, as we did, about these concepts, somebody that they just see every day on the way to the school bus, they don't know them or
Right.
have any dialogue with them. But if they just see somebody every day, that's a known person to
Right,
them.
that's not a stranger.
So, and a kid can't make a decision about whether I'm going to get in this car or not. Is this guy a stranger? On the split second, they can't use.
It can't be a stranger. He has a dog.
Exactly.
The dog is lost.
That's how easy it is to
Yeah.
disarm a child.
Right.
So all our publications, I wrote the first ones. They talked about, no one should be touching you in the bathing suit areas of your body. Adults don't ask kids for help.
Right.
Adults ask adults for help. You don't need to be helping looking for a lost dog or anything. You don't get in a vehicle with somebody that your parents haven't said is okay.
I remember being in kindergarten, maybe first grade, like after school care, and we're out on the playground, and the teacher comes up and goes, "Ryan, you're going home," and points to someone. I said, "I don't know who that is." And they said, "No, they're here for your mom. They're taking you." And I said, no, I don't know who that is. But they ushered me right into that car. And my mom had apparently called. I didn't get abducted. I mean, but I remember being horrified, partially because of, what I was being told is don't ever get in the car with anybody. If somebody comes to pick you up and you don't know who they are, make sure you tell people. And I'm telling the teachers, that's not for me. I don't know that person, and I was terrified that entire ride from my school to my mom's work because nobody had told me anybody was coming to pick me up, and I had no idea what was going on. But getting back to some of that work that you did lays the foundation, and you actually start the National Center for Missing Exploited Children.
What happened
that
is
funding helps.
The Department of Justice gave us money, and they put me on a special thing for 6 months to set it up, to organize it, create it, design it. So I spent the next 6 months in a consultantship with the Department of Justice to set this thing up.
To set it up.
So I began, what we did was we brought in top professionals from all over the country to do this. We had more experience in one place in crimes against kids than any place in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Because we hired experienced detectives from Virginia cities, Baltimore, an experienced district attorney from California, 2-3 professionals off the social services street intervention team in Louisville, which was very good. We brought in the pros from Dover, so that we had in there at the beginning a skill set
Yeah.
Of actually having worked crimes against kids. And one big part of what we were going to do was work on child sexual exploitation, not just cases of missing kids.
Yeah. And so John Walsh had a part in that.
He traveled, we put him on the road. He traveled all over the country making presentations and advocating for the different things we were trying to do, legislation at the state level, and clearinghouse. Florida started a clearinghouse at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Yeah.
Clearinghouse on missing persons.
Right.
So a lot of the work trickled down, and we had our hands full because it had never existed. The White House wanted me to open we opened in April of '84, 6 months after I started setting it up.
Yeah.
And the White House wanted me to have President Reagan push a button that would open the hotline. But I couldn't set up a center going from 0 employees
Right.
in 6 months and do a professional 800 line at the same time. So we opened the 800 line up in June that summer because we just couldn't put it together professionally. And
Right.
do it
You have to train these people to answer the phone. You can't just.
Well, and there's a lot of issues, like people didn't think about it. We had to resolve all the new issues. What if a lead comes in?
Right.
What are you going to do with a lead? I saw this picture of this kid, and so I remember, because I went over many times and testified in front of the Senate and the House about what we were doing. And one time, one of the senators said to me, "Why don't you give these leads to the families?"
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, he asked me that on the record, and I said to him, "Senator, because if we did, somebody's going to get killed."
Yeah, it's gonna be a homicide investigation.
And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, it's simple. If we have a sighting of a child in St. Louis in an apartment complex, and we give that lead to the parents in Iowa who are looking for that person, they're going to go to it."
Right.
And they're going to go through that door probably, whether somebody wants them inside or not.
And how many of these leads end up being misidentifications? And now you've got
most of them are. I mean, this is a tough business.
So you got to have a professional that can vet that information.
It's a balance. And,
sure.
We wanted to provide as much as we could, but we had to use the law enforcement system that existed for safety's sake.
Right. There was a lot of people whose safety was at risk there.
Yeah, the kids.
Kids. Yeah.
We can't have parents going up thinking that's their child. There's just all kinds of risk, but we had to think that through and establish policies, and we weren't real popular with all of them.
Sure, I bet not. They made a movie. I know some. I won't say I know a lot of famous people, but I know some people that have been on TV. I actually know a few people that have been in movies. You're the only person I know that has had somebody play you in a movie.
2 movies, yes.
2 movies.
They did 2 of those.
Well, we may have found a clip.
Oh no.
Clint, can we?
Well, that's Richard Mazer playing me.
Yeah, it is. Let's see. So that was what's his name? Richard Mazer. If anybody Googles him now, you'll recognize him. He's been in.
Oh, he's a great actor.
Yeah.
He does a lot of character roles. He's a great actor. He was a real good supporter of what we were doing.
Here we go. He had the mustache down. That's for sure.
Well done. That's right. But they don't try to imitate.
No,
you.
no.
You know, they don't. They don't try to duplicate.
They're
you
not
in
trying
most
to
of
be
these. But
Jay Howell.
We gave them. John and I were so insistent that they do this thing right that I think because we weren't looking for excess drama. We wanted a docudrama.
Right,
we wanted
right.
the
You
reality
wanted the real
out there.
thing.
So we would correct them when they were shooting scenes.
I bet they
I think-
loved you on the set.
I bet John and I weren't bashful, and we would say no, because they would set something up and it didn't happen that way, and there was no real point in setting it up in a way it didn't happen.
Right.
The truth is enough here.
Yeah, there's enough sensationalism in these real cases.
Yes.
I mean, let's not forget
Yes. Hello.
Adam Walsh
and
what
the big thing that NBC did with those showings. They did something that had never been done in our country before. At the end of that 2-hour television movie, the first one, Adam, they gave us 2 minutes, and they ran 55 pictures,
all the pictures
of kids. Now, we had never done it. Child Find answered that. One of the nonprofits did great work, and none of us knew. We did not know what would happen at 11 p.m. that night.
Right.
After running them, because they'd never been tried before. Well, of course, there's a pregnant pause of about a second or two, and then the phones go off.
Just start blowing up.
Yeah, and then they repeated the movie because it was successful and it was nominated for an Emmy, and they repeated it and gave us 2 minutes every time.
Yeah.
So I think they ran it 3 times in 18 months, and by the third time, it was the center hosting it, and in the meantime, the second time, we got FDLE to host it.
Wow.
You know, to receive the calls. You had to have somebody to receive the call.
And you start to see the evolution of John Walsh goes on to host America's Most Wanted, and that's basically
for America's Most
right.
Wanted.
It's birthed
came
right
from looking
there.
for missing children. Yeah.
Right. It's birthed
All kinds
right
of
there.
things started. We started at age progression. You know,
yeah.
aging out a child's picture so we can see what they looked like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, we got the CIA and the FBI over.
Then they wanted to.
They were real
just
interested in that
technology.
technology.
Yeah.
So, a lot of things were pioneered in those days that were new.
Do you have a story with John Walsh? I mean, you know, when we're dealing with unsolved murders, John Walsh kind of has a place, you know, at the top for getting raising awareness, getting recognition, and ultimately actually getting arrests.
Yes.
You
he
know?
has apprehended, or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
show
or
has
his-
apprehended, and thousands of people, and people have surrendered, shown up and said, "I'm him on the show. I'm here to surrender."
Right.
It's been,
And he still has
fascinating.
America's Most Wanted's not still around, but there's a new
he
version
had On the
of
Hunt,
it.
and now he's got something.
He's
Searching or something. He's got something that's
and
new.
we have a family. One of our families. He's been out there, and their case is going to be featured. I think this month on that show. I can't remember what it's in search of. I don't know what it is, but yeah, he's still doing it. So you know him as a human being, as an individual, not as the TV star.
We went up to the Hill once because remember, he's unknown at the beginning. He doesn't have the standing that he has now.
We joke about you knew me beforehand, but you knew John Walsh before.
But beforehand, he was his case was semi-known. It wasn't known everywhere, more in Florida.
Sure.
But we went to the Hill. This is when we had the center, and it's a couple years since I worked up there. And we went to one of the judiciary committees in the Senate, and we said, we want you to pass this Missing Children Assistance Act, the later thing we were trying to get through. And so they were afraid of us a little bit. And so they take us in and sit us down, and they say, we've done a lot of work on this here at the Judiciary Committee, and we want to show you some of this. What do? They reach up on their shelves. You know, they have these transcripts of hearings.
Right.
They reach up and they bring down a hearing that I set up and planned and John testified at 2 years before. They showed us our own hearing to convince us they were doing the right thing.
You guys ran into some issues. Originally,
are
with
you kidding?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about
Nobody
this,
wanted this.
A lot of times. It's hard to publicly say you're opposed to anything having to do with children, victims, murders, But hey, we still struggle with it with cold cases. There's no national database for cold cases. There's a lot of stuff parallels what we're going through now, with what you guys started back then with children. And even
Were people opposed to it? It's kind of a myth that nobody opposes
exactly.
children.
Well, and I always say publicly, because it's
Exactly.
hard to stand in front of a camera and
They
say,
did not like us, and
Yeah.
they we had the Justice Department, when we were trying to pass the first missing children bill. John and Reve, of course, were very vocal, and we were doing Senate hearings. Well, the spokesman, the official spokesman for the United States Department of Justice, said to a newspaper interviewer, we're not in favor of this, what they want to do with missing children, and that couple in Florida can go pound salt.
Ooh.
That's what the official spokesperson said.
Yeah, how did that work out for him?
Well, we said this isn't even a fair fight because these people aren't very bright.
right.
Because that helped us.
Yeah.
Amen, brother.
Preach it, because
this is not how you do this kind of a fight when you are a major monolithic bureaucracy. But that's why they did the movies and stuff about us, because it was kind of a David versus Goliath. And of course, Senator Hawkins was a maverick in her own right. And whoa, I can remember she was not bashful about this. And of course, a U.S. Senator has access to the President of the United States, the head of the FBI, head of various agencies in the government, and she was absolutely fearless in using that connection to get stuff done for kids.
Kudos to her.
Kudos to her is right. She had been abused herself as a child, and she just didn't see why common sense things, and a lot of this is common sense. Now, when I sat down with the head of the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, where all this data is, wanted people, and it's actually not an FBI computer, it's a switching station. They switch and make available the data from each state to the other states is actually how it runs. Well, I sat down with David Nemechek, who was the head of it at that time, and I said, how many missing persons do you have in the National Crime Information Center? He said, 100,000. I said, well, you know, and I do, that's a portion, a small portion
like 10%
of the number,
or something.
Probably about 10-15%. And he said, well, we have a real good system here, but we can't make the locals use it. You are the U.S. Senate. You can make them use it.
Yeah.
So now, if you looked at that unidentified or the missing person file, it has 900 and some thousand in it at a time.
Yeah, we still run into those problems. If there's if it's, what do they call that, an unfunded mandate, where it's just they pass a law but they don't actually give any resources to do it. It looks good on paper, but it doesn't actually equal that information being shared.
And now, of course, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has changed because the internet.
Yeah.
Now we have the cyber tip line where we take information over the phone about children being lured or enticed or approached, child pornography, on the internet.
Yeah.
And of course, that's just,
That's
in the early
game changer
days,
for
they
everything.
accused John Walsh and I of exaggerating the threat to children.
Yeah.
We got accused of that a lot. Well, it turns out we were underserved.
Yeah.
Because what we knew certain things about crimes against children, but in those days, if you wanted to commit a crime against a child, you had to befriend one.
Yeah.
You had to become in a child serving agency, it's a
Right.
school or a
Neighbor,
Boy Scouts,
the coach,
neighbor, coach.
yeah.
You had to get
Uncle,
close
whatever it
to
was.
a child and probably their family
Right.
in order to endear yourself to them and to approach. Well, now you just sit in a darkened room and open up
Right.
that machine, and you can traffic in pictures. You can approach kids in chat rooms.
You can be something you're not.
You can be something.
You can
Of course,
pretend to be some.
Every time now, the situation in Florida was interesting because in the 90s, all the states, Florida included, passed new laws that said it's a crime to use a computer to lure or entice a child. It's a crime to travel to meet a child in that process stuff. Well, these are all new statutes, so we didn't know what would happen with them. Well, you remember To Catch a Predator?
Yeah.
NBC, I think.
Yeah.
And this guy with a kind of radio voice would say to the guys, "Oh, come on in." See, remember that?
Yeah.
And
they've got their 6-pack of beer
Yeah,
in their
yeah.
brown bag.
Yes, it was unbelievably easy to identify those bad people. But we wondered what's going to happen with this television show bust
Right.
in a courtroom.
Right.
So here's what happened. One of them was, I think, St. Augustine, and it went up on appeal to the First District Court of Appeal, our appeal court in this part of Florida. And the defendant argued a lot of different things. He said, number one, they used a nonprofit to work on this, and you can't contract and agree with a nonprofit to do law enforcement work. They said it was entrapment. The bad guy had been lured in. They said he really didn't do enough because he never committed the crime. He didn't do enough. They raised all those things that we anticipated. And the appellate opinion is real interesting because it says that the nonprofit that NBC contracted with got something like $100,000 or something for every hour of primetime TV that this ended up being. It's kind of interesting how they did it. But all those arguments, the appellate court said, there's nothing illegal about them cooperating and contracting with a nonprofit. Number two, all of these things, whether it's the emails and the chat and all that, all of them are recorded or on paper.
Right.
So there's no doubt about the language the nonprofit used or anything else because it's all established. And the guy said, I didn't really commit the crime, and they said, you drove 210 miles from South Florida to meet what you thought was a child, and you had this various paraphernalia with you, which is bad stuff, and you went into the house anticipating him. That's enough for the attempted crime.
Right. That shows intent, if there was ever intent. Yeah.
So what we wondered, because it was such a new way to do things. Now, as you know, if law enforcement opens up any of these stings, they catch people.
Yeah,
because there's so many people out there on the internet who want to do bad things with kids. We underestimated how many people have that
bad people
instinct.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I feel like it with unsolved homicides, estimates of, we're about 250,000 estimated unsolved murders in the United States. So I kind of feel like somebody at some point is going to start paying attention to that number and realizing that, that's not just number of victims. That's number of killers that are still out there.
Yes.
And those are things that I think will at some point grab attention that we try to do when we go up to DC or when we travel.
The good news
conferences.
Is the rape kits are getting some traction because it's the same principle.
It is.
And it's identifying and apprehending bad people, multiple victim perpetrators, serial perpetrators.
Absolutely.
It just makes sense to have it. And the timing hasn't been right until now because you needed a database to compare that DNA.
Right.
Well, people say, well, Jay, shouldn't they have been doing this in the 80s, in the early 90s? Well, it wouldn't have done much good because each state, like Florida did, started to establish laws in the mid-90s that said, Florida started out, we're going to take the DNA of convicted sexual offenders.
Right.
Well, then that started to expand everywhere, Florida, everywhere. It's going to be felons. It's going to be misdemeanors. Now it's every arrestee. So that has now, as of about the early 2000s, it made sense to start making the states compare the rape kits, the DNA and the homicides. Now, of course, with this genealogy search on top of it, you've got a meaningful database that we didn't have in 1990.
Sure, absolutely. And we're dealing with a lot of that now, genealogy, and actually we're in contact with the Department of Justice and some of their programs because the sex assault kit initiative has been so successful in getting them tested, that hopefully they will get to a point where there are no untested kits anymore. That's a hurdle in itself, and
it is.
That was the big hurdle. So hopefully we're making some progress there where those kits are tested, and maybe I know for a fact that some of those results overlapped with unsolved murders. So now the new grants that are available for those sexual assault kits include genealogy in the.
Do they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You gotta
as
use
the
it.
technology keeps getting, so law enforcement out there actually has that option now too, to use some of that funding for genealogy. That's brand new. This latest grant release, So hopefully again we'll start to see some results from those, and then we know that there are people paying attention to the fact that there's a lot of unsolved murders out there, and we're starting to make a few waves and hope to get those resolved. Real quick, I wanted to touch on. I've been to your office, and you have some pictures on the wall that are pretty cool. We can't. Yeah, Clint, show this picture. I'm pretty sure. So that's Ricky Schroeder.
Yes, that is Ricky.
Anybody that was alive in the
happened?
80s will
He
remember.
was Silver Spoons.
Yeah, Silver
He
Spoons.
had his cousin was missing from Southern California, and he came to town at President Reagan's second inaugural. And the White House called me and said he wants to present a bracelet with his cousin's name on it, who's missing, still missing, from Southern California, but we can't do everything. It's the inaugural weekend.
Yeah.
Can he come to the center and do it? And so I said sure, and he did. He was a great guy. His parents were great, and
Did they ever find his cousin?
yeah, I think her remains were found subsequently out in a wooded or natural area. But
The homicide? Yeah.
well, yeah, and I don't know if they've ever solved the case, but I believe they did find her. There's Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if that was a Photoshop picture of you in the background, peeking over Muhammad
Actually,
Ali's.
that was a formal affair in D.C. for kids stuff. Wasn't for us. Wasn't for
yeah,
the
yeah.
National Center, but we were there, and he was still able to talk. The champ.
Yeah.
And I said to him, we really appreciate you coming here. Your presence means so much. Of course, if you've ever been in a room with him, he has more charisma than anybody in the room, and by far. And he talked in a whisper. He said, "Do you know my camp where I used to train?" Well, I followed Ali
Yeah.
a lot, so I knew what he was talking about. He had a camp, a compound in the hills in Pennsylvania. He would go there 6 weeks before a fight or something. It was undisturbed, and he'd train up there. And I said, "Yes, I do know that, champ. I know exactly what you mean in the hills of Pennsylvania." He said, "Yes, I gave that to children. Children live there now, children's organization."
Wow.
Which I thought was pretty nice.
That's pretty
Because
cool.
a lot of celebrities you talk to don't say anything about children or why they're there.
Who was the woman? There's a picture.
Wonder Woman?
Is that who it is?
Yeah.
Is that
That's
where are we at?
Linda Carter.
Linda Carter?
That show
All
was
right.
on TV then, and Linda was starring in
is.
it.
Okay.
There she is. There's Linda. And
Yeah, I
she did
didn't
a
recognize her out in her.
fundraiser
cape.
with us, without her cape and all that. She was real supportive.
And then there was a picture of you with President Bush, the first one.
That's right.
Was he president, or was he vice president? And
when
Reagan
we
was.
started the center. President Reagan opened the center himself, and we met with President Reagan several times in the White House and did different things. I wrote some speech materials for him. I wrote some proclamations for him.
Okay, so you actually got some FaceTime with presidents.
Yes.
While you were.
Always interesting.
Yeah.
Always interesting to go over, and that picture at the bottom there, that's Teddy Ruxpin.
Oh yeah.
Because what we did was Teddy Ruxpin, Don Kingsborough, who started Worlds of Wonder, the Teddy Ruxpin doll in 83 or whenever it was, 85. No, it's probably 85 or so. That talking
Teddy
animated
Ruxpin,
Teddy
yeah, eyes
was
open
the most
up.
popular Christmas gift for 3 years running.
Wow.
And Don wanted to do this because he had an interest in protecting children. So he gave us 25 cents a bear the second year, 50 cents a bear the first year that Teddy was sold. That ended up being $750,000
Wow.
that Teddy gave us. And so I did a tape for Teddy called the Missing Princess tape. You had those stories.
Yeah.
And the tape, at the end of it, I did stuff that Teddy said. Nobody should be touching you in the bathing suit area of your body. Kids help kids, adults help adults. I put all that stuff in there. So Teddy became a great partner, and he was hard to get a hold of. So we would take him over. That's down Kingsborough there with Vice President then Bush, because what we had was accessed in Washington, and to thank people like Don Kingsborough, we would take them over there. 6 U.S. senators in their offices, give them a Teddy, go to the vice president, that kind of stuff.
Dropping them off.
And so when I was over on the Hill, on the House side, when we tried to get the missing children bill through, the first one, the House opposed it.
Yeah.
And one particular House member was an ex-FBI agent and was the head of a subcommittee in the House, and he opposed it. Well, I happened to be over there near his office with these Teddies one time. So there was nobody there in his office, which is unusual, and you could see the Capitol in the background. So I went in there and put one of the Teddies in his chair in the office with the Capitol in the background and took the picture.
That would have been a better story now, because you could have taken it with your phone and texted it to him immediately. But I'm sure it was still
Teddy sitting in the big chair with the Capitol in the background.
And gosh, I could talk to you forever, Jay. We've gone already 50 minutes. We haven't even gotten to a couple things I want to clear up, which is the victims' rights movement. We had this big Marsy's Law push across the country here last year, but Florida was the first state to adopt a constitutional amendment for victims' rights. A meaningful one in 1988.
90% of the people voted for it. It was a simple paragraph. It was all we could get. We had to compromise. But it became a model for other states. I went to Alabama, to Colorado, other places to describe our experience, to reassure. I met with all the district attorneys in Colorado to reassure them that it hadn't turned the system upside down. There wasn't endless litigation.
But it started a paragraph, but it expanded over the years.
Well, 960 is our main statute, and that's the mother of all victim statutes in our state.
Right.
But that started then as enabling legislation that passed with the amendment.
Yeah.
960, of course, has much more dialogue and specific rights. Florida has one of the best packages of rights at the statutory level in the country.
Yeah, and you do a lot of trainings for the Attorney General's office now in Florida, and you do trainings all across the country. And a lot of times you're talking about victims' rights legislation, history, where we are, where we've been, and even where we're going now, because Marsy's Law did come into play. And now you're going around training on what those new changes are meaning in our state here in Florida, which is, there's some complications there.
Yes, there are. It's not simple. It wasn't done perfectly. You can tell it was crafted by without a regard for some parts of our criminal justice system. I was able to change some of it, but I was not successful in changing all of it that I wanted, and there will be some issues in implementation, and I'm worried now that the legislature is about to go into session and that they're going to pass some enabling legislation, and I'm afraid they may be on a path to strike some of our really good existing rights. I don't want that to happen, but this is not easy. It's pretty deep. It's complicated. We got layer upon layer now, so it's not easy to understand all the ramifications of messing around with it.
Right. And we've already seen some. I was reading some articles, some simple. The first things I guess that happened were victims' names don't have to be released, but they don't know if that's right out of the gate, if you have to opt in. There's all these issues. So there was a case at a bank down in South Florida, and 2 of the victims' names were released, the other 3 the family withheld, and then that created issues with the media and public records laws, which Florida has a very open and broad public records laws, and so there's some stuff that's still got to be hashed out.
Yes.
And I guess we're going to see some of that kind of unfolding, and we always. I've tried to pass some legislation, and I've gotten your advice on some things in the past. There's always these little things called unintended consequences that good intended laws can still have unintended
backfire.
consequences, and you really have to pull in the right people to get this stuff addressed before it becomes a law, before we're backpedaling or
We beg
trying
them to talk to us because we'll always help.
right.
We beg them to talk to us, but they don't have the skills to figure that out all the time. And so we're regularly saying, well, you better not do this because here's what's going to happen. And because they're not skilled in this area, and it is its own arena of law now.
Yeah.
And it's deep. It's got many statutes that are a part of it. You have to know how they connect. The training that we do is in depth. I do 8-hour trainings on some of that. It takes some time to go over it and to really equip the advocates.
And it could be a longer training. I mean, honestly, I mean,
could
we'd
do
all
3 days or
probably want to jump out the window when you weren't looking, but at some point. But
well, I did a training in West Palm in November, and on forensic interview of children who were abused, and the things we're doing in Florida. And I had 6 therapy dogs show up for that training, and 5 of them slept through my presentation. So I guess I think it's a good. My defense is it wasn't because they were bored; it was because they were well trained.
Well trained, perfect.
That's my story.
We get some questions in this realm, especially when people first become victims, and the one question we hear: why do defendants have more rights than victims? And I was one of those. And at the very beginning, of course, there was not an arrest in my dad's case, but as I was sitting through trials, you could see the frustration with families that they have to sit there quiet. But I've talked to enough people. I've experienced enough of this. I think what we forget is that the accused are presumed innocent.
Well,
So
people don't remember it, but our country was founded on a conviction that we're being unfairly treated. The
Right.
Crown, the English government, is overreaching. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, you will see a laundry list of items that they were complaining about. What were they? They were all criminal justice system overreach.
right.
We're being taken back to trial for England. Our homes are being searched without a warrant.
Yeah.
That was the atmosphere that started this country. And so it's firmly ingrained. None of us want innocent people to be convicted.
Absolutely. And the Constitution was absolutely written to avoid that,
Yes.
or to try to avoid that.
So did the accused have a lot of rights? Yes.
They do.
And will they always in our society? Yes, probably.
They will. And what it's important to remember is that goes back to you wouldn't want to be falsely accused of something and be, just what used to happen back then.
Well, it happens now. Because, and unfortunately, it's happened to people on death row in Florida. And the government needs to be careful when they seek the ultimate penalty, because we have had some innocent people get it. And that cautions us all that we do, and I believe the rights of victims can be honored and enforced without interfering with the traditional rights of the accused, because I don't believe that's the way. The victims movement in this country has never said we're trying to reduce the rights of the accused. We've said we're trying to elevate the rights of the victim.
Right.
We believe it can be done without taking
Exactly.
somebody's fundamental rights away.
Exactly. And I think, we have 2 cases off the top of my head that I can think of. One that was in New York where the defendant was ultimately set free due to the Innocence Project, or through the Innocence Project. The family had thought the person that killed their loved one for 20 years was in prison and then was released because he wasn't the person. There was another one in South Carolina that the detective said, "Oh, well, that's the guy. He's on trial for this other murder, but we think he's associated with it." And the family accepted that he was convicted in a double homicide, that they were not going to pursue their dad's case. And then 12 years later, she's doing some genealogy research on Google and types in her dad's name, and her dad pops up on a cold case website for that sheriff's office.
Really?
And no one had even contacted her and said, not only, not only did we not pursue the case, we actually figured out that it wasn't him, and now that's an unsolved case, and we're back trying to solve it. We have more of them come to my mind as I'm sitting here thinking, law enforcement does a great job, but there's always a chance. We want to make sure that the right person is being convicted, and that's why those laws are made. And it does feel unfair when you're the victim, but that's the system we live in. And I don't know that, like you said, there's a way to bring up victims' rights. I don't know that there's a way that you can have equal rights, or victims have the say that they sometimes feel they deserve, and not trample upon,
There's very few places where they really butt heads. One of them is whether the victim is allowed to remain through the trial.
Yeah.
There's one where, and Florida's worked out a reasonable accommodation, because the judge then, according to the statute, has to make a informed decision, and the judge will ask questions like, what is the victim going to testify about? Are they an ID witness or not? Where in the order of witnesses, Madam Prosecutor, do you intend to call the victim? Has the victim been deposed and had their story committed to the record? Those questions, and then the judge makes a determination, which is how it should be, because Florida also has the rule of sequestration. At the beginning of every trial, the lawyers are asked by the judge, does anybody want to invoke the rule? That's the rule, and the rule says pretty simple. If you're a witness in this case, you have to remain outside and come in only when you are going to testify, because we don't want you to change your testimony or build it up based on what you hear others say.
Right.
So it's a common sense way to try cases, but that's one of the few areas where, and a judge makes what do? We allow the judge to make a decision whether it impinges on the rights of the accused.
And I've reached out to you about that, because we've had some defense attorneys, that want a family, and I'm not talking about eyewitness accounts. I'm talking about a lot of times, IDing the victim,
right,
or maybe a history with the victim, whether it's a disability that the victim may have had that the prosecution wants to bring up, or a relationship that the victim and the perpetrator had, and somebody within the family. We had a case where it was brothers. One killed the other brother, and the victim's daughter was, the defense attorney wanted to call the victim's daughter to the stand, and wanted her kept out of the courtroom, the entire trial. She was not an eyewitness. She wasn't at the scene, but there had been an ongoing feud with the brothers, and I guess the defense attorney wanted to bring that in. It didn't at that time appear that the state was going to fight it, that they were just going to ask the victim to stay out.
They often do, because that's easier.
It is.
And it's more protective of no errors or mistakes, right. So you have those inherent conflicts that are there.
And that's what we need to point out is the reason why they tend to err on that side is because these are things that can be brought up in an appeal later.
It's just easier to not have that problem.
And sometimes a family does need to evaluate whether something is worth having to go through this entire thing again. If it's a close question. But remember, the system also universally says, no, you shouldn't sit through the whole trial, when that's not even necessary to tell the victim that, because there's no potential real conflict. Right.
So there's nuances to this about how it practically is handled. It's not good for victims, but there is at least a mechanism in place for the judge to figure that out and make a decision.
And we lucked out on that one, that there was a plea deal reached before it went to trial, and we didn't have to go there, because I was starting to get frustrated that the state wasn't really taking it seriously, that daughter wanted to be in there.
They don't understand. One of the problems of the system is they don't understand and appreciate the importance to the victim's family to be there.
Yeah.
They just have always underestimated that. You probably need some life experience to understand that, and maybe close to a situation like that, because it's a fundamental human interest, but often the system didn't recognize it.
Yeah, yeah.
I've had prosecutors say to me, I don't understand why it's so important for the parents to be there.
Yeah.
I've had them say that to me. They just don't have the
That's
human
a problem with
understanding.
you, not with the parents.
What I've said to them is, if that's the way you analyze this, I can't help you. I'm not that powerful.
Right. Another one we get a lot of is continuances.
Yeah.
There's a law in place with that as well. The state attorney's office can, so typically the defense is filing a motion for a continuance, and the state can object, and the judge will overrule it. If most of the time, the defense needs time to prepare, but as you're starting to get into 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, sometimes I don't know if assistant state attorneys know this. If they object 3 times in a row,
the judge can set a trial real quick.
Yeah, and that is a protection for the victim's family to also have a speedier resolution to a case. But I've never seen them object once. I've not been in every single.
They do sometimes. I file those motions.
Yeah.
The month that law passed, I filed in Jacksonville courtroom a motion for a speedy trial because I went to the clerk's record and found there were 3 objections.
Yeah.
So I filed a motion.
Yeah.
And of course things started happening fast.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are protections. A lot of times. Yeah. I think.
But you have to object, and like in child cases, child sexual assault, the defense attorneys are sophisticated enough to know that if they just keep delaying, the child's memory is also going, and they're going to have a tactical advantage, and then they're going to argue to the jury, well, it's been 2.5 years, ladies and gentlemen, and his memory is foggy, as you saw, and therefore you can't rely on this child's testimony.
Right.
Well, the judges need to be a little more attuned to the circumstances of the case.
Well,
and who's involved here? What are the witnesses?
I'll show you a parallel with that and cold cases. When we do get that arrest, witnesses' memories. We had the 43-year-old case where a witness died.
Yes.
While the defendant was in jail awaiting trial, the key witness. When you're dealing with these cases that are old, memories are not getting any better. People are getting sick, moving. Evidence has been lost.
Investigators are gone.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I know that you have to strike that balance between giving the defense enough time to
there are
provide
reasons, I don't think it's a hard balance for the court to make because there are reasons. You're waiting on DNA is a reason.
Sure, that's a good reason.
That's a good reason.
Right.
There are circumstances in securing and contacting witnesses that need to be done to ensure a fair trial. But you don't just need to continue for its own sake.
Right. Well, and
it has to be a reason. The judge should require a reason.
And I think sometimes you get in such a habit of not objecting to a continuance, especially if you're dealing with a death penalty case or something where there could be a number of reasons why an appeal is validated later on in a court. So you're trying your hardest to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. But we had a case last year that was, took 30 some years to get to trial and took 34 years. And the defendant at the time of this was in his 30s, and he was 66 now, and he was an old 66.
Infirm.
Yeah, this guy was, and I think, that played a part in the jury's decision. I think, the defense has a way of, kind of showcasing how frail this poor, individual is now 38 years or 34 years later. And
but he was sentenced.
He was sentenced.
And served some time.
Yeah, this one I'm talking about, he got life, but it was a death penalty case, and I think,
death penalty has changed, and our victims need to understand that it has changed in Florida. It now requires a unanimous verdict from the 12 citizens who are on the jury, recommending to the judge that the death penalty be imposed, and that's we knew that was going to happen. The courts had told the legislature for years, you need to do this.
Let me ask you this, because I've read it, the jury makes a recommendation, but I've read there's a rub with that too, like that the
Well, in the old days,
law
the
was
judge
the
didn't
jury
have to
has
take their
to-
recommendation.
Right,
See, now
exactly.
things have changed. Remember,
Right.
some of it's because the laws have changed in how they do this. And in the old days, it was a recommendation, and the judge could override it. And then they saw the judge overriding it where the jury wasn't recommending it, and that's a problem. And so
Right.
finally, most states have done this. Florida was just slow to do it. If we'd have done it earlier, require unanimous decision out of the 12 citizens, and it's just one more.
And then the judge, can he still override a
I don't
unanimous?
think
I don't
so.
think so, because I think that
I
was
think
part
that's
of the
another thing
issue. It
that's
had to
gone.
be the jury had to
The
decide.
jury has to now, I think.
Has to decide. And now all of those cases that were 10-2, 9-3,
Are coming back for
8-4,
resentencing.
every single one of them has to be
In a certain time period.
resentenced and or reach
Well,
some
they
kind
have
of an agreement.
they have to
that-
do a kind of a junior trial.
yeah, because those jurors are
Those
long
jurors
gone.
are gone,
Right.
so you have
They've
to
been-
bring in 12 more and give them a presentation of some of which includes the facts of the case, because they didn't hear that.
they
part.
weren't around for the
They're
guilt
doing
phase
this all the
of it.
time.
Yeah.
And then they'll clean it out. Just a backlog. They'll clean that out.
One of the questions we got yesterday when we were talking about this, was somebody wanted to ask was, is it normal for the county crime victim witness advocate to know information about a murder that the family is not privy to? And
Well, if that victim advocate is in the state attorney's office, they may indeed.
or the
know that.
sheriff's office.
Yes, exactly right. Law enforcement, state attorney.
I think sometimes families, we don't want. It's not fair for a family not to have information that other people have, but the reality is that if that's a sheriff's office or police department advocate, if it's a state attorney's office, district attorney's office, if it's a paralegal that works for the prosecutor, there is probably dozens of people that have more information than the family.
Some of it's done. We've explained this to victims over the years. There's a reason. It's a standard technique in American prosecution that you try to keep the witnesses pure.
Yeah.
You don't give them all the information. You don't let them read the police report before the trial, because if they get on the stand, the defense attorney is going to say, well, they got information from other sources and they're getting it wrong, and this is polluting the water and muddying up the situation. So there always has been a feeling of keeping the witnesses pure. I've had cases where two eyewitnesses to an armed robbery right in front of their car, and they're both in the front seat. And one of them says the security guard of the Brinks truck pulled a gun and fired at the suspect as he fled with the money. The other person sitting in the front seat said, I didn't see him pull a gun and I didn't see him shoot the weapon. Now, when you have that, and I'm trying that case, what do I say? I say, well, when the trial is over, I'll tell you who got it right.
Right.
But I'm not going to try to convince them and give them that information now. I want them to testify from their memory.
And those are witnesses, surviving family members, who may not even have to take the stand. I think they get really upset when they don't have information.
They should get upset because some things happen. It's happened in cases in my own family and homicides.
Yeah.
What happens, the system is not perfect. And so the family is not told about details that they probably need to be told, and not hear it on the witness stand or see the pictures on the witness stand.
I'm a firm believer in that. You've got to.
But it's always going to plague us because it's people. They just make mistakes.
And we're talking about cases that make it to trial. If you got an unsolved case, you're in this limbo world where they're not providing you the information.
It's the worst of all.
It really is frustrating, and I understand the families, pain. But I encourage families to keep a respectful relationship with law enforcement and state attorneys, district attorneys, because I'm going to tell you something. If you're pushing back, you may never find out certain information. But I have created relationships with the detective in my dad's case, with prosecutors in our judicial circuit. And while I have never sat down with the case file that was my dad's and gone through it, I am confident that I know everything I need to know. and I don't really want to know
The
some of the other.
system doesn't share information well, does it?
It doesn't, and some of it is
It never will.
understandable,
It never will.
right? And there are reasons why they don't.
Some good reasons, some bad reasons, but we're stuck in this.
And I
quagmire.
have families that tell me all the time. They say, "I just want to know how many times my loved one was shot."
Yeah.
And I've had a sheriff tell me I'm not going to release that information. I had a family that kept making appointments to meet with the prosecutor and then kept canceling at the last minute. And we finally got her there. She wanted to know if her son had a gun on him when he was killed because she said he was a small guy. He got bullied a little bit, and it wasn't uncommon for him to carry a gun. And she thought that he was maybe engaged in something that he shouldn't have been. And the prosecutor told her that he was the unintended target. Like he wasn't even supposed to be there. The person that was the target wasn't there. They was just misidentified, and he was shot. No, he didn't have a gun on him. And that mom lost more sleep than anybody I've ever dealt with until she found that out. But she was so scared what she was going to find out that she refused to even make those appointments. Each case is so unique and so different. And law enforcement and prosecutors often find themselves in a tough position of who they can tell and what they can tell because you don't know where it's going to end
And their
up.
instinct is to guard it. And one reason they guard it, you see them on TV every day, not releasing the details, because if they get a confession, it ain't enough if the guy says, I did it.
Yeah.
I shot that person. That ain't going to hold up. You have to have facts from the perpetrator that only the perpetrator would have known. And if they're all in the newspaper, the defense attorney is going to pull that out and say, well,
it was so
all
easy
public.
for them. You know, we had a case, I'm sure you saw, a week ago Friday, where a guy just walked into the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office at 9:00 at night and said, I'm here to confess. And having talked to some people over there, you know, they didn't immediately throw the cuffs on them and, you know, start calling the media. It's like, you know, well, they have to find out. They have to do some work and figure out if this is a legitimate confession or not.
It's hard to understand, but people have confessed in this country many times to crimes they didn't commit. It's hard to believe that.
It is hard to believe,
but it does
has
happen.
happened.
History has taught us that.
I don't know the answer to this, but Adam Walsh, the murderer, was never tried for his murder, but Otis Toole was confessed to it.
And retracted.
And retracted.
Confessed again.
And confessed again and retracted. And I have heard differing from respectable people that believe and don't believe. You know what I mean?
Right, because it's
both.
a mixed bag. If you look at the facts, and some of which I know, it's not all pointing clearly in one direction. Some of the information he got wrong.
Yeah.
Some of the information he got right.
Yeah.
Well, life is muddy. It's not clear. It doesn't all flow in a consistent way. And that's typical of cases. What happened with him, he was in a Texas prison with one of his partner in crime, and they confessed to 600 murders.
Right.
The problem was how the interviews were done. There were 6 homicides in Jacksonville he was interviewed about. But unfortunately, the interviewer gave him all the facts and said, did you do this one? And you can't do that. You have to have facts. The perpetrator has to give you.
There's no question that he was a serial killer.
No, and he was in prison for a Jacksonville homicide.
Right.
Arson homicide.
But sometimes, you know, what are you going to do to me now? I'm in prison. Now I'm going to take credit and create.
Well, those guys. Unfortunately, investigators from all over the country went to visit them in Houston,
right. And they're checking off unsolved cases left and right.
The investigators were not trained in confession-only cases.
Yeah.
If you've ever tried them, which I have, and I had to say to the detective, "Well, what do we got other than the confession?" That's it. He said he did it. Well, we got to show the jury that he had information. So I want you to think back. What information did he give you that only the perpetrator would have known? Well, he cut the telephone lines to the place and to the house. Okay, that's real important. And that's what you're looking for.
That ties back to what information law enforcement gives to a family. If they had gone out and said, the telephone line was cut, and then the family goes on TV and says that one time, and it's
Then
found one place publicly,
it impeaches the confession.
right? It
You
could
have
jeopardize
to
a
reserve all
confession.
your cards.
These things are so complicated.
But you
and
know what
it's-
the answer is, Ryan? I think over the years, if you take the time to explain why, because some of the things have reasons why they're there.
Right.
But the victims don't ever get the explanation. My experience has been if you explain, here's why they're worried about the trial, being a witness, here being in there for the whole trial, here's why they're worried about not revealing all the details of the murder because the confession is at stake, here's some examples. Doesn't make them happy, but at least they hear a rationale for
Right.
why the system functions.
And I'm a firm believer in that. Give me the information, even if it's not information I want to have. If I don't, it's not what I want to hear, but at least if I have something that I can look at logically and say, if I remove the emotion from it, I can understand their perspective. It still doesn't make me happy. I still want this,
The
but we don't always get what we
system
want.
is a confidential secret, and it's never going to change in its fundamental character. There are reasons why, and we're always going to struggle with this. The struggle is always going to be there.
Yeah. In closing, Jay, you are a private attorney. You handle some victims' rights cases any time. But tell us a little bit about what those cases are. I mean, because a lot of times people don't understand. They think that they can sue the law enforcement agency, or
Most of the time they can't.
and most of the time they can't. But sometimes, I mean, let's be honest, especially we're dealing with cold cases, evidence collection was handled very differently in the 70s than it is now. DNA wasn't a thing, so they weren't always packaging and storing evidence in a way that benefits the case now. Those are not criminal acts. There was not intent there by law enforcement to to sabotage the case. You can be mad about it. You can be frustrated about it, but
you can't file in Florida. You can't. There's 10 appellate decisions that say that you cannot file a case against law enforcement for an inadequate investigation.
yeah.
That's just a fundamental rule that the courts have maintained. And now that doesn't mean there aren't things that happen that are actionable in a legal way. There are. But the fundamental one of they never checked this lead, they didn't interview all the witnesses, those don't rise to legal cases.
Well, those are hard things to prove anyway, because you're going under the assumption that every single thing they've done is noted, written down now, hasn't been lost, hasn't been, wasn't taken home by a detective somewhere down the line to review and forgot to bring back. I mean, there's so many things, but these people can get in touch with you if they have I don't want to say questions, because you'll end up all day every day on the phone, but
a lot of people have issues about what do they do in this situation, what can be done, and of course there are things that can be done to move a case forward that is helpful, and so we try to steer them in the right direction. And sometimes they want to get involved in the movement, in testifying in front of the legislature and trying to change laws, and sometimes they're great testifiers because of what happened in their case is a great example of why the system needs change and why this law needs to be passed. So that's never going to go away. It's an ongoing battle. At the beginning, I think we thought that if we trained all the police and crimes against kids that would last in those units, and it doesn't. New people come in, and we have to have a constant vigil of training and information and latest technology, and it's never going to go away.
Right.
Sorry, you thought that you thought there was an end on
the
horizon?
No. I've known just in my short time that there will always be, well, here's one thing that we're going to keep dealing with. Technology keeps changing, and that keeps, this genealogy thing has still got to be tested in the court. Everybody wants to have their case run through genealogy.
The internet has changed all of this.
Well,
in law enforcement.
and we are talking about privacy issues with the genealogy thing, because they are not, they're taking information from a public database that is not the
Carefully
suspects,
guarded,
and they're tracking the
Right.
suspect
Well,
through
the courts will wrestle with those issues and see if that's any violation. I can't imagine the courts finding a problem with that,
No,
but the
yeah, I
courts
don't-
have yet to wrestle with
Right,
it. So
right.
until they do, we don't know what the final word is.
Exactly, and I think we're getting reports and hearing that they're not seeing issues with it, but you can bet that somebody is going to take that thing as far as they can in
Of course,
appeals.
of course.
When they get
Well,
convicted
that always happens.
of that, and that's a good thing, because then it sets precedents, and then they can't use that,
Gives guidance to law enforcement
right.
on how the courts want it done.
and they can't use that later at another date and say all of a sudden that now it's a privacy violation when it's been upheld. So. JayHowell.com is your website. You have a lot of good
Articles
resources and
and
articles
stuff, yeah.
and stuff like that on there. Somebody asked if you knew a victims' rights attorney in Virginia, and I don't know if you do or not. If you want to,
Well,
if you think about it,
Here's what we've told people. We get that call a lot.
yeah.
Hundreds of times. What we tell them is to look, and now with the internet you can do this. You could go to that town or the nearest major town in that state, go on the internet and say, attorney, former prosecutor. And if you get somebody, even though they may be doing criminal defense now primarily, if they were a former prosecutor and they spent several years there, you can look on their website now. That's a pretty good indicator that they may have some good standing in the system, and people would listen to them.
Yeah.
Now, they're not victims' rights experts, but they are the people that we sometimes go to that a family could hire to get information or move the case forward or whatever, because they're doing it through somebody that's known and respected in that system. So there are ways.
Yeah.
But no, there are some, but there's no existing national network
Right.
of people who do victims' rights.
Yeah, and I mean it's really kind of it's not, I would imagine, through the internet, and I mean, there again, each state has different laws. Each
State by state.
state by
Violence
state
is done at the state level, not the feds.
Yeah, so it's hard to sit and talk a lot about other states other than to
They have different rules than we do.
to find somebody that's got some experience prosecuting in that area.
That's
and-
been a good one.
Yeah.
And then if the people are there and they call us and they're in that town and they're not far away, we say, ask some people that you know in and around the system who's a good prosecutor who is liked, who's now in private practice.
Yeah.
Any kind of private practice.
Right.
Because they know the system well.
Yeah.
And the system kind of knows them because they were in it. And that's a good person to ask for help if you want to bring somebody in to do some tasks.
Jay, your first question to me was, do these have to go an hour? When I asked you to come on here, and we went an hour and a half.
That's your fault.
And I don't know if anybody's listening
I hold
again.
you responsible.
You can blame me. Anybody that couldn't make it through today, so you can blame me, because I find this stuff so interesting. And your stories, I mean, to me, they're inspiring. They give me goals. They give me things to shoot for and to try to make a difference. And so I appreciate it. And I hope, I know that people that sat through us talking for an hour and a half will have learned something today.
They will have had a good nap, and we will continue to work together, you and I, as we always have.
That's right. They'll see a wonderful clip of the guy playing Jay
Right,
Howell.
that's pretty good. I didn't have that one. That's pretty good.
Yeah, we did
there.
not tell you that was coming.
No,
We wanted to see you. I should say too, I forgot that this was over here. We published this book a couple of years ago through the Grief Diaries series, which was Project Cold Cases. 22 families that have experienced an unsolved homicide. One of them has since been solved, and I asked Jay Howell to write the foreword on this book because of your experience, and you did that, and I will forever appreciate that. If anybody's interested in that book, it's called Grief Diaries Project Cold Case, and it's available on Amazon.com. And it's 22 individuals telling the stories of losing their loved one to an unsolved homicide, including myself. I'm in there as well. So, and you actually are a survivor. You had a family member that was a victim of homicide.
My cousin was murdered here in Jacksonville.
And you were a former prosecutor at that time, so you knew a lot.
I knew a
more
lot.
than
But there were also mistakes made there, and there were things I could not easily accomplish as much as I know about this system.
Yeah.
It's just a tough thing.
It is. It is. I think that that says it all, though, so that even somebody that's been in the middle of it has issues with it. We're here. Project Cold Case is here to help those families. There are advocates within state attorneys' offices, district attorneys' offices, sheriff's offices, police departments, other nonprofits. Lean on those things heavy, because that's what we're there for, and they'll help you and we'll help you. So, Jay, thanks so much for your time today.
I'm glad to be here, Ryan. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much. We'll be back next week with another Facebook Live. Take care.